you hinted at something about events between the age of 3 and 7.
Hmm.
Why is 3 and 7 significant here? Or is that just an example? Like, could this be precognitive even? So like before you're in the womb?
Potentially, it could be precognitive. Typically, where I see the big change happening is during those years,
Hmm.
and this is when our brains are developing and we're creating our framework for living. So during those years, if we think of from an evolutionary perspective, the
Hmm.
child is learning to live in the environment that that particular child is being brought into,
Yeah.
and a child is not innately afraid of a tiger,
Hmm.
right? But if the
Yeah.
mum sees a tiger, the mum is going to scream. And from that point forward, the child will say, look, and they look at the tiger, they'll have an adrenaline response because they know that it's something they're supposed to be scared of.
Yeah.
So there's a period in our life where our programming is very malleable.
Hmm.
And effectively, that's where we see the majority of these inefficient programs have been created. Because from an evolutionary perspective, it was incredibly useful 20,000, 30,000 years ago, and not so useful in the last 200 years.
Hmm.
So, so that's why we see those areas. Now, these issues can be created later in life, but oftentimes that's with very severe trauma.
Mm.
So PTSD type issues are effectively something getting into the programming, but at a later stage, and that's why they're so impactful. But typically, the things that impact you in later life are impacting you because you've created some kind of initial sensitizing event, some kind of trigger previous to that that makes it scary. So having it having a spider thrown in your hair isn't necessarily scary. It could be something you laugh at. However, if your mom was screaming whenever she saw a spider, having a spider thrown into your hair is terrifying for you. So we're looking at really, it's typically those sorts of ages, sometimes up to the age of 10, where we see the sort of the very interesting situations, but it's rarely much later than that that I see as the initial starting point. Typically, the starting point is somewhere through childhood, and oftentimes, realistic, an awful lot of it is linked to just self worth and self love.
Hmm.
So, public speaking, you're putting yourself out there to be judged by your peers. That will go back to sometimes it goes back to public speaking memories of, I was 5 years old, I was giving a talk at kindergarten, and this happened. But also, oftentimes, it can go back to parents being very critical of the young child. So feeling that they're not good enough, they're not loved, they're not intelligent. And now in a public speaking position, you have to go out and you have to put yourself out to the judgment of society. And
Hmm.
again, from an evolutionary perspective, living in tribes, putting yourself to the judgment of your peers is a very scary thing, a very dangerous thing historically as well. Um, so that's the sort of thing. I mean, effectively, everything usually comes down to love and self worth. Am I lovable? Am I enough? Am I good enough? And what made you not feel those ways as a child?